Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the minister here at First UU. On the day that the Dobbs v. Jackson decision came out, I was out of town, away from the people that I know and love, and the places that I might gather with others who were experiencing the same sense of dismay and disorientation that I was feeling. I was, however, at the UU General Assembly and surrounded by people who knew that we had to name the thing that had just happened and the inherent injustice and inequity of its consequences and the need to do something. And that's how I found myself in Lounsdale Square in downtown Portland with thousands of people I didn't know and hundreds of people I did, sort of. I mean, many of them were wearing yellow UU Side with Love t-shirts. Some of them had UU Chalice tattoos. So I knew that they were my people. We had just processed out of the Synergy Bridging service led by the young adults whose bridging we had just celebrated. They bridged not just from children in the church into adults using their voice of faith, but into people who led the whole church out into the public square to take a stand. You may have seen my post on Facebook that said something like, if I ever wonder whether or not I'm affiliated with the right faith communities, a procession out of the worship service directly into the public square to speak out for justice will always reassure me. And it was no surprise to me that we were all there together because these were UUs. And even before I became connected with Unitarian Universalism, I knew its people from their yellow t-shirts at every protest, rally, and direct action I've been a part of in the last decade, and there have been a bunch. Last week we talked about the first UU principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And if the first principle were a fundamental truth, the second principle might be its natural embodiment. Because if we truly believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and we believe that human agency is the way we get things done, then we can't help but act with justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. After all, stated beliefs that don't match the actions of the one claiming them are nothing but meaningless platitudes. In fact, in the ancient Near East, the words justice and righteousness were often paired together and presented as two sides of one coin, so to speak. In the Jewish and Christian traditions, the Torah and Hebrew prophets pair the words justice and righteousness more than 50 times. It's easy to see examples of the ways that religious people have focused on one of those terms to the detriment of the other. Even non-religious people may find themselves touting right belief and continually failing to take right action. I should clarify that I've preached this message to myself a number of times before I bring it to you. Of course, there are things that we all believe about the way the world and our individual lives should be that we fail to put into action. There is a litany of things in my own life that I need to do differently or better enough to live up to my own aspirations and my most deeply held beliefs. So since we're doing a deep dive into our UU principles, I'll start here with the question of whether my words, actions, and choices back up my claim to live by the first principle. I hope you'll join me in the inquiry. How might we act more consistently, more boldly, and more compassionately for justice and equity in a world that is dripping with injustice and inequity, where in many cases we are the beneficiaries of those drippings? And what really is justice, equity, and compassion anyway? Kenneth Collier writes in the little book, Our Seven Principles in Story and Verse, what is justice? If you think this is an easy question, I refer you to Plato's Republic. He used this question as a beginning for outlining his entire philosophy. According to Plato, justice is not primarily a matter of the political state, it's a matter of the heart. For only a just people can create and maintain a just state. Martin Luther King Jr. said, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. And the much beloved late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had these words from Deuteronomy displayed on her office wall, justice, justice, thou shalt pursue. As she worked to ensure that the United States Constitution leaves no person behind. Ginsburg labored tirelessly to promote a Constitution that is ever more inclusive and that allows every individual to achieve their full human potential. So in some ways, justice is a world where resources are allocated based on need and not greed. Where everybody has enough because nobody has too much. And where the inherent worth and dignity of every person is the foundation of systems and structures, instead of the inner workings of society being built on the lie that some people are more worthy and more important than others. The term equity refers to fairness and justice and is distinguished from equality, whereas equality means providing the same to all. Equity means recognizing that we don't all start from the same place, and we must acknowledge and make adjustments to imbalances. The process is ongoing, requiring us to identify and overcome intentional and unintentional barriers arising from bias or systemic structures. Many of you have probably seen the meme on social media that highlights equality versus equity. There are three people standing outside the fence at a ballpark, and there's one taller person who can see over the fence and one person who's right at the edge of the fence and one very small person who can't see past the fence at all. And it talks about how this is the reality for people, how we are at different starting points, and we don't all have the same resources and the same access to the things that we need. And so the second image represents equality, where each person gets something to stand on, but it's the same size box. So the tallest person is now taller, and the middle person can now see over the fence, but the smaller person still can't see over the fence. And so the image highlights that equity would be for each person in that case to get what they need. So the taller person is not standing on a box at all, and the second person is standing on a box that's just not very big, and the third smaller person is standing on quite a tall box to be able to see over the fence. This is the difference between equity and equality. But then there's another image. An image where the wooden fence has been taken down and there's a chain link fence that everyone can see through. The barrier has been removed. Some people call that image liberation. I would suggest that that image is also a part of what it means to be just, to create justice, to build just societies. It begins to get at how equity leads to justice. So the process of someone realizing that all three of those people having the same size box to stand on didn't accomplish anything, didn't get people what they needed, led someone to think about what would be equitable. And when you start thinking about what would be equitable, you can't help but think about what is justice in this case? How do we take down the systems and the barriers all together so that people have what they need to live abundantly in this place, to live as a part of the community, to live included and loved and whole? Practicing equity helps address imbalanced social systems. However, justice can take equity one step further by changing societal systems in order to achieve sustainable and equitable access for future generations in the long term. In an information page by the United Way of the National Capital Area regarding their Practice Equity campaign, the writer points out that there are many ways that you can practice and promote equity in your community, household, workplace, and even faith community. And they say the first step is to reflect on your own belief system. What implicit biases do you hold? How can you dismantle those? How can you educate yourself through books, media, workshops, and more to understand equity further? How can we listen to the people who are impacted by particular issues and difficulties and hear them and believe them about their struggles and do what we can to make this world an equitable place? And just as equity is a building block for justice, compassion is a tool for our understanding of and efforts toward equity. Compassion is a deep awareness of the suffering of others with a desire to relieve it. It literally means to suffer with or suffer together. To show compassion for another is to side with love, as you say. It's a way of entering into someone's circumstances without judgment or contempt, but with genuine care and concern. Compassion is a form of love that helps us move toward justice. Civil rights activist and public theologian Ruby Sales has said, "I became involved in the Southern freedom movement not merely because I was angry about injustice, but because I love the idea of justice." So it's where you begin your conversation. Most people begin their conversation with, "I hate this," but they never talk about what it is that they love. And so I think that we have to begin our conversation, begin to have a conversation that incorporates a vision of love with a vision of outrage. Sales talks about our work for justice, or as she might say, building beloved community, as a conversation, which is important. Because as people in a covenantal faith, we don't do any of this alone. We do it in relationship with one another, relationships that both comfort and challenge as we grow together. Compassion is something that we can act on individually. We can demonstrate openness, give people respect, and treat people with kindness, all on our own, but we need one another to achieve equity and justice. And as we talked about last week, the circle of who it is that we understand we need grows wider and wider and wider when we are truly living our values. According to Richard S. Gilbert, who wrote the book on the second principle in With Purpose and Principle, essays about the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, the term beloved community elucidates the liberal religious concern for compassion, equity, and justice. I'll close with an excerpt from his essay. The beloved community, then, is a constellation of values to be lived out by the individual and the religious community in the wider society. Unitarian Universalism seeks to be a church without walls, in which social concerns become the agenda of the people as they take their spiritual and ethical values into the public arena. Congregants become conspirators for the beloved community. Conspiracy meaning to breathe together. There is then in Unitarian Universalism a seamless garment of spirituality and social action. We are a spiritual center with a civic circumference. We cannot be content to be mere occupants of time and space. We want our time on earth to mean something. We want the space in which we live and move and have our being to be in good repair. We are ill content to wear our religion only in our heads and hearts. We want it to be expressed with our hands. Social justice work is not simply another option on the spiritual menu, an add-on of extracurricular activity, but part and parcel of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. May it be so. Blessed be. And